WMPG thrives with support from listeners and from Maine Solar Solutions. Maine Solar Solutions, helping empower homeowners and businesses with solar electric solutions for 10 years. Information at mainsolarsolutions.com.
You're listening to WMPG 90.9 Gorham, Portland, Southern Maine Community Radio from USM. Live from the Orion Cygnus arm of the Milky Way galaxy, this is Scientifically Speaking, a weekly half-hour program devoted to elegant curiosities, and I am one of your hosts, Sarah Ching, and joining me, as always, is Bernie Rhyme, DJ Star Watcher. How are you, Bernie?
Yes, hi, Sarah. Very good. Thank you.
Bernie is our professor of the Astronomy Lab here at USM and our local protector of the night skies. Reach out to us at WMPGScientificallySpeaking@gmail.com or on Twitter at WMPGSciSpeak, and you can head over to WMPG.org to find the last 5 weeks of archives of all of your favorite shows, including this one. Bernie, could you let our listeners know what is up in the night sky for this coming week?
Yes, certainly. So this will be Friday, August 26th, less than a month to go to fall to start. So we're getting near the end of the summer. So we'll have just about a new moon, and actually technically waning crescent. It'll come up just before the sun comes up. The day is obviously getting shorter. They're down to 13 and a half hours. Sunrise is just around 6 now and sets about 7:30. And then the planets are still pretty much the same. Saturn was at its best in the middle of August a couple weeks ago. So it'll be up as soon as it gets dark. So before 8:30, you should be able to see Saturn. And then Jupiter's going to reach opposition in exactly a month, September 26th. So that means right now it's coming up just after dark. And end of September, it'll come up exactly when the sun sets. And then Mars is getting closer too. They're still in sequence, but they're not all in the morning sky now. And Mars will reach its opposition on December 8th. So right now it's probably coming up around midnight. And then Venus, of course, is still the bright morning star, even though it's getting later. We're going to lose that toward the end of next month. And of course, Jupiter and Saturn are in retrograde because they do that when they're close to opposition. So, so basically that's it. You might see a few meteors, but there's no actual showers till October because of Perseids, of course, we didn't see many of them because the moon was full. It's always be a good week if you get some clear nights in.
Awesome. And how many more of those outside shows are you doing?
Oh, right. I think we end right around Labor Day, so we're just doing a couple more weeks.
Couple more weeks.
Yeah, we're meeting some really neat people, families from all the world, a lot of really smart kids. You know, we do a presentation, but obviously we let them ask a lot of questions and that type of thing. So,
yeah. Awesome. Thanks, Bernie.
Sure.
And if you couldn't take notes fast enough, you can also check out the monthly What's Up column in the Portland Press Herald. We're going to go a little bit back in time, about 100 years ago, actually. A little more than 100 years ago. And actually, not too far from today's date, on August 17th, 1920, there were about 16 people who came together and signed up to learn how to grind their own mirrors in Springfield, Vermont. And the instructor was Russell Porter, and he was an amateur telescope maker. And after this group created their own telescopes, they used them to explore, just like Bernie does, the beautiful night skies and what was out there. And this group kind of came up with this official club on a hilltop observatory. And on December 7th, 1923, there was the first official meeting of the Springfield telescope makers. We recently, a couple weeks ago, about a month ago, we went to Stellafane, which is the oldest amateur astronomy conference or convention conference. Yeah. In the world? I thought it was just in the U.S.
Well, I think it's in the world. Maybe China has something that's older. China might have something.
So yeah, this was the 83rd convention.
Yeah, because they didn't have it every year. I mean, technically, next year would
wars and stuff. Yeah, and Bernie, you have been going. You had
gone.
I
went to at least 7 or 8 or 9 of them.
Yeah,
maybe even 10, but I don't remember all of them.
Yeah, and when I first moved here, that was obviously when I learned about Stellafane. There are quite a few people who come from across the US. Not too many, a lot of them are definitely local, but I really wanted to go ever since I heard about it and just never got the chance to. And this year we were like, let's go.
Yep.
And our former guest, Peter Gillette, he has been going for, I think, 30 something years
Yeah.
consecutively. It's just like a thing that they do every summer. And so, we hung out with him. We hung out with some other folks that we met up with in the circle. And I think there were about, what, 800 or
Yeah, just
so
under a
people,
thousand. Yeah.
yeah, who attended. I think that's considered a low year, probably, COVID,
Yeah, I've
recovery, and
seen over
everything.
2,000 sometimes.
And so, welcome to another episode of Scientifically Speaking. We wanted to talk a little bit about Stellafane, just a little bit of history of the site and the club, and also give you a little bit of details on some of the interesting things that we saw and learned from this year's convention.
Hmm.
A little bit more about history. Russell Porter is kind of a name that I wouldn't say idolize is the right word, but
Well, you
he
should.
is, yeah, he was kind
Yeah.
of the founding person. Breezy Hill was part of his land. And so I think that's where they set it up. They, logged the trees there and created a clearing. And that's where the infamous pink clubhouse was
Yeah.
built. And it's this pink clubhouse. It's very cute. It's very endearing. What we hear, I think the story why it's pink is they built the structure and there was like donated paint, and that particular pink wasn't
Mm.
particularly popular, and
Yeah.
so it's just this pink clubhouse, and the members continue. They do their repairs and everything in the same color. Cellophane actually is the name comes from stellar fane, which is Latin for a shrine to the stars, and it was adopted by Russell Porter when the clubhouse itself was constructed about 3 years later after that first kind of meeting of the telescope makers.
Mhm.
It really only refers to the building, but then initially, but over the years, it had become kind of the name of the convention, and I don't know if it's the name of the site. Um,
No, it's
but yeah, the
Breezy Hill, and
convention.
then they
Yeah,
added the other
Breezy Hill is
parts.
the
It's not
thing.
the
Yeah.
site name, but yeah.
Yep. Yep. Yep.
Yeah.
So yeah, Bernie, do you know much about Russell Porter?
Yeah, actually, when I first went there, he has a place in downtown Springfield, about 2 or 3 miles from Breezy Hill, called the Hartness House. So
Mm.
there's a little museum underground. He actually built a tunnel and an observatory there that he could get to in the winter without going outside. It's really neat. Maybe at some point you should go and see that, and some of our listeners should too. But he designed some of those telescopes. But what he's really famous for, I mean, other than starting at Stellafane, he built the observatory for the 200-inch Mount Palomar telescope
Mm-hmm.
that George Ellery Hale designed, the telescope, but Russell designed the observatory, which was like a football field across. That itself is a huge project, way bigger than the scope, the scopes that he built for Stellafane.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So
Mm-hmm.
yeah.
Some more kind of interesting information. He reminded me of one of our former guests. He was actually a navigator on, I think, 6 or 7 Arctic expeditions.
Hmm.
He did a whole bunch of like kind of drawings or sketches of what he saw there, some of the indigenous people and indigenous, plants and everything that he saw at his time there. He actually has ties to Maine. Apparently, he founded an artist colony in Port Clyde, Maine,
Hmm.
and then yeah, I think one of his biggest claims to fame is what you just mentioned with Palomar.
Yeah.
So we talked about telescopes. Obviously, I think the biggest kind of premise of Stellafane is yes, it is the viewing of um, the distant galaxies and our neighboring stars, but also I think the biggest thing is that they love and want to foster kind of interest in making telescopes. They have workshops for how to make telescopes at their convention. It's all like they have this whole thing on grinding mirrors and, you know, all about creating kind of basic reflector telescopes. And cellophane itself has a couple of custom built telescopes.
Yeah, the first one actually is called a Porta Turret telescope, was built in 1930, so a few years after they started telling. It's really unique. It's almost like the James Webb in a way because it has a mirror way out in space with just a few structures holding it. There's no enclosed thing. There's
Mhm.
not of what you would think of as a Dobsonian or some other kind of telescope. So there's mirror sticking out there with some grids, and then you can go inside like a fairly big room. So,
Mhm.
if it's cold or raining, well, if it's raining, you can't see that. But if it's really cold, and we actually saw some nice sunspots projected
Yeah.
inside. So it's a
Mhm.
very unique design. Of course, a lot of Russell Porters were unique. So he built that quite a while ago, and they use it every year that we're there. Obviously, if it's clear enough. So that's one.
Yeah, no, it was very interesting design. There's essentially just like I think one mirror,
Yeah,
right? Yeah,
right. There's
it's
one
just
mirror
the one.
sticking out in space.
Hmm. Hmm.
It's a good 15 feet away from the observatory,
Hmm. Hmm.
and it's not enclosed. I guess they put something on it if it's pouring rain or whatever. But it's a very.
Yeah,
When I
yeah,
first saw that, it's very strange.
yeah, yeah. And the inside kind of feels a little bit like I don't know, a little like space capsule for some reason.
Yeah, it's really
Um,
neat inside.
yeah,
You're right.
yeah,
Having a telescope, normally you don't think of you going inside the telescope to see stuff, but you're inside, and that's amazing.
right.
Yeah.
The other telescope that they have is, I believe it's the second one that they built was in 1995 was when it finished building. They started in the late 80s, but it's a 13-inch Shipment telescope. Apparently, it is the second largest Shipment telescope in the world. That's what we learned.
Yeah, it's a pretty unique design, but at least it's a
Mhm.
regular observatory.
Right,
It's
right.
a scope that has, the enclosure for the scope is not sticking out in space somewhere.
Yeah, it is, I believe, officially called the Mcgregor Observatory,
Mhm.
and it is dedicated to a former member. What did we see in there? I
Well,
don't
yeah, I
remember.
saw, so I looked at the famous M13 globular star cluster in Hercules.
Oh, yeah, you saw that at night. I didn't see that one.
Yeah, and some other scopes are on it, but that was certainly the best view of it. It's really neat.
Yeah.
There's over 500,000 stars there, so it's
Oh.
one of the best views I've ever seen. Plus, if you're really careful, and I was surprised because even the person showing us this didn't know this. And I
Hmm.
learned this I've probably seen it hundreds of times. If you look at it really closely, there's almost a spiral structure inside this group of older stars that form a halo. There's probably 50 or 100 of these forming a halo around the center of our galaxy. So if you look
Wow.
at it in a really good scope, not quite as good as a Shipman necessarily, but any scope maybe over 12 inches anyway, you
Wow.
can almost see a structure in this old group of globular star cluster of old stars.
That's cool.
Yeah.
Yeah, I remember I was like, what are we looking at? And then you were like, or what is it pointed at? And you're like, it's a
Yeah.
cluster. I was like, I don't like clusters.
Yeah, well, there's a lot more. Every cluster is unique, and this is particularly unique because it's our biggest. There's a bigger one in the southern hemisphere, but it's our biggest. And the design of that scope, even though it's not huge, 13 inches, it's kind of a combo refractor and reflector.
Right,
It's a
right,
really
right.
interesting design, and
Yep,
that
yep.
makes it much better than the regular 13-inch reflector would look like.
Yeah. They mentioned that it makes it really
Mhm.
it makes looking at planets really nice.
Yeah.
I'm not really sure
It has
how
the
that.
benefit of both worlds. It's fairly
Hmm.
big aperture, and the
Hmm.
refractors are generally better for planets.
Hmm. Interesting.
Yeah.
And then the last telescope that they have on the site is called the Brenning Observatory. When we went, I don't think it was in operation,
Mine
but
wasn't. I've looked through it before, but not this year.
yeah. And it's a 10-inch Cassegrain telescope.
Hmm.
And I believe it was built in 2005 or finished in 2005.
Yeah.
The observatory itself is like a 12-foot dome shaped, very cute. It's yeah,
Yeah.
I don't think it's as unique,
No,
but
it's
it
just a
is
pretty
a cute,
basic
yeah.
scope. Yeah, we have bigger scopes at our own observatory in Kennebunk
Hmm.
that people can go to instead of driving 3 hours out
Hmm.
to Vermont.
Hmm.
So
Hmm.
yeah,
Yep,
yeah,
neat. All right, Bernie, let's talk about
yeah,
what we learned
mhm,
there. What
yeah.
were some of the highlights from your end? Because you were
Well, there were
there
so
much
many
earlier than me.
different events and workshops and things
Hmm.
that, of course, we couldn't attend all of them. But we did attend a little bit of a telescope making workshop. They were doing something called a pitch lapse,
Hmm.
which is what they make from a blank mirror before they started grinding it. So that was an interesting process. This is basically geared to amateur astronomers to have them either make scopes or be able to buy things at what's called a swap table, which starts Saturday morning, and they can even put
Everybody
together.
was all about the swap
Yeah, they
tables.
can. There wasn't that much this year, but I know a friend of mine actually who used to be in our club. He bought all the parts and made his own 17-inch telescope just from stuff that he bought at the swap table.
Wow.
So generally, that's really all I did this time. I bought a few meteorites and a couple of things. Sometimes I'd buy some pictures of northern lights or whatever. But generally, if you're really into the technical parts of it, there's always some really neat things. And then I bought some
Hmm.
books there too. So that's a big feature of Stellafane. And then there's the main speaker, the keynote speaker. So everyone gathers together on Saturday night. So this year was Dava Sabel, and she
Yeah.
talked about writing and creating the book The Glass Universe, about the Harvard computers. They figured out there was helium in the sun, and these are some of the most amazing women astronomers. They all should have won Nobel Prizes, but Henrietta Swan Leavitt and Leavitt's law, and how to figure out distances of the universe. So it was an interesting story. I had read the book already, but it was still a good presentation. And there were other keynote speakers. I actually met Clyde Tombaugh, who discovered Pluto there, Paul Horowitz, who runs the SETI project out of Harvard, the head of the Vatican Observatory from the Catholic Church.
Oh,
Alan
wow.
Stern was there a couple times, who runs the New Horizons mission to Pluto. And then we had George Ellery Hale's grandson give a presentation. He's, of course, the one that developed those big telescopes that Russell Porter.
These are all previous
Yeah, these are
speakers.
some of the previous ones that I've seen.
Yeah.
So, and actually, I missed one. I missed that I would have liked to see David Levy, who co-discovered the comet that hit Jupiter in 1994.
Oh,
He,
nice.
he's a person out of Arizona. I guess he gave a really great presentation that I missed. Oh, and John Dobson.
Yep.
He's given many keynote presentations too, and I met him in person. He does that little rope tricks when you're walking around, and he has some unique theories of the universe. It's not Big Bang and it's not steady state. It's some kind of a combination, which now with the web pictures, he may have been more correct than regular
Yeah.
people may even have thought. So he was quite a character, and I met him many times down there too. So a lot of
Neat.
great presentations.
Yeah. I didn't see that many presentations.
You just saw the
Um,
one.
but I really liked the one that I attended, and I liked one of the I don't know if it was a keynote, but it was the one prior to the keynote.
Yeah,
Dr. Mario Mata is actually a cardiologist who's part of the Stellafane Club, and I guess he probably could have gone into astronomy or physics if he didn't
yeah,
decide to go into medicine for some reason, but maybe he didn't want to make his hobby his work. So, but he had a fantastic talk about how light affects hormones and how it suppresses the development of melatonin in our body. And his whole speech was actually focused on the importance of dark skies, which we all know we're both kind of, well, I'm just a layman advocate of dark skies. I think, Bernie, you obviously do a little bit more,
a
but
little bit more. Yeah.
and what we learned is he really went into kind of the health details of it. And basically, when we're talking about light pollution, we're talking mostly about blue light pollution, which is
Mm.
most of the light pollution that we see when it comes from like street lights and things like that. And there's all these kind of interventions and ways to mitigate it. A lot of it is like pointing it down because from like a viewing perspective, you're not really trying to see the night sky necessarily from like the main boulevard of your city. It's trying to protect dark skies from outside of the city. Even like where Starfield is, you can see kind of that glow
Mm.
along the horizon. And that's because light is pointing up into the sky and it is causing this light pollution that's diluting our ability to view the skies.
Yeah.
But he went into, as I mentioned, the health effects. And so one of the things he mentioned was like, for example, right now, we are producing, or at night, or yeah, right now, we produce 8 to 10 cancer cells every day. They're not necessarily cancerous because they don't spread, but they are bad cells, essentially, I think is what he deduced it down. And so a certain proportion of bad cells can then become cancer cells. And so melatonin, the purpose of melatonin is that it cleans the brain. It allows the brain to help the immune system clear bad cells. And so melatonin itself probably isn't that like having low melatonin itself is probably not that important, but the impact that melatonin has on your immune system is ultimately what he's referring to. And so light suppresses your body from being from having melatonin be created, and therefore you have your immune system being suppressed, which allows those bad cancer cells to then potentially develop into cancer. And apparently, these are really the types of cancer that are really impacted by this are hormonal cancers, which he referred to specifically thyroid breast cancer. So yeah, I thought that that was fascinating because it impacts us, and it was kind of a really interesting segue because it was a lot of like, oh, don't like look at your phone late at night because a lot of the lights we have do emit kind of this really strong peak blue light, which tend to have a stronger effect at suppressing the production of melatonin in our body.
Hmm.
I don't know what you got from that talk, but that was kind of, I think, the high level.
Yeah.
Uh,
Well, it
de-
also affects animals and birds and things like
Mhm.
that too, which isn't good. So we
Oh yeah, can you
we
talk about
obviously,
the
yeah.
Luxor in Vegas?
Yeah, well, I was there twice, and I saw that they shine a bright beam. That the Luxor is supposed to imitate the pyramids. A
Mhm.
lot of things in Vegas imitate real things, like the Eiffel Tower and the
Mhm.
pyramids and stuff like that. So it has this huge beam of light, and I guess what we don't know, and I didn't even know when I was there, they have to sweep up hundreds of dead birds because that light is so bright it kind of attracts them, and it just kills off the birds. They have to sweep them up every morning
Mhm.
before they turn the light back on, and the people come into the Luxor, the big pyramid, and start gambling or whatever. So that's
Mhm.
really dangerous and bad. That's like an extreme example,
Yeah.
but yeah.
Yeah, I had
Hmm.
no idea about that. I mean, that's just
Yeah,
crazy.
yeah.
And we know that Acadia, for example, has put in a lot of effort to,
Hmm.
or has done quite a bit to try to save and secure its night skies. But
Hmm.
even Acadia, I feel like it's not that dark.
Mm.
Um,
Right.
I don't know if it's an official like dark sky area.
I
Probably
think the
is.
park is, but yeah, so they
Mhm.
tried, they can put a few more rules on the town of Bar Harbor, but
Mhm.
it was darker. I've been going up there since the 70s. It was
Mhm.
darker before.
Yeah. And I mean, this is why, when you go to a stir party, they'll give you that kind of red cellophane
Yeah.
paper or whatever,
Yeah.
which you can kind of hover. Like people were taping it over their car
Yeah.
lights and things like that. So yeah,
Hmm.
it's just blinding. I mean, when you're
Yeah.
trying to get there. The other talk, I guess it was a talk, that I really liked. It wasn't specifically a lecture, but it was part of the keynote series called Stellafane Shadowgram by Dr. Christine Larson. And the talk was Holding Up Half the Sky, Women in Astronomy. And she is actually a faculty member at Central Connecticut State University. I believe she's a professor of physics and astronomy. And she's actually authored books. So, Stephen Hawking, a biography, and Cosmology 101. And she advocates quite a bit for kind of women in science, women in astronomy. The history of women in astronomy has been part of some of the research that she's done. And she had this really great talk. I mean, she basically kind of talked about, when I had mentioned those 16 people that came to that very first telescope making event hosted by Porter, it was actually 15 men and one woman. And so, she talked a lot about how we try to get more women involved. And I think a big thing that she focused on, while she highlighted a bunch of really great women, her big call to action was that if looking at our brochures and the things that we're advertising programs with, if the photos are of all these old white men, like, are you really going to get anybody else there? And sometimes you will because they're really interested and really driven, but at the end of the day they'll still feel kind of unwelcome or that they're not really meant to be there. And so that was kind of her call to action, and I thought that was a really great message, and kind of wanted to share that here.
Hmm.
Any other highlights from Cellophane?
Well, Friday night they have a whole series of talks because those are like 10-minute talks.
Hmm.
So then you can see a lot of different things. Let
You
me
should
see.
give a talk.
Yeah, well, actually, I recommended someone give a talk once there, and they did it, but it was a controversial thing about, and he also talked to our club. He thought the tilt of the Earth was a little bit less than it really is.
Uh,
So I don't know if I should
okay.
have recommended him to. So there's like a couple of the radio shows we did with that cold fusion person
Hmm.
and a few other that was full of conspiracy theories.
Hmm.
That was, yeah, those weren't too great. So this was kind of, you could like that with a conspiracy thing, almost like a flat Earth.
Yeah.
But he gave a talk there. But I went to a good one on citizen science where they had developed a little telescope to track the first satellite, Sputnik, with.
Yeah.
It was interesting. Some of those scopes are still available, and
Yeah.
anyone
Very
could kind
cool.
of get one and track Sputnik back in 1957. So that was very
Yeah.
interesting. And
Great.
then Phil Harrington did one on binoculars, and there were lots of other good short talks.
So, as we come to a close, Bernie, what is
Mhm.
it that, if somebody's interested or not interested, I mean, if you're listening to our show, you must have some interest in astronomy because we talk about it a lot. But what do you want to kind of tell our listeners?
Yeah. Well, I mean, well, obviously you could join the club if you wanted to, but if you just wanted to see some really interesting things through some really big telescopes, one of the big features of Stellafane is to get to look through some big telescopes. And
Hmm.
the lines used to be up to an hour long when they only had a few of them and 3,000 people. So this time there was no line more than like 10 people. So we
Yeah.
looked through a 32-inch telescope. Stuff, I mean, these are almost professional level scopes, things you could never normally do. And we even took pictures right through the eyepiece of things you'd never normally see if you didn't have the 50,000 plus dollars to buy one of these. So it's making it available to regular people. And you
Hmm.
should know, if you don't already know, that a lot of libraries you can rent a little telescope. It's only 4.5 inches, but there's a lot of things you can do kind of for free, or just go to, there's other conventions too. It's not just the one in Vermont. You can go there and just make it more available to more people, just like planetariums make things available if you live in a city or don't get to see the sky or can't travel far away. So that's the whole theme of Telescope, to make it available to more people, the sky and the mysteries and seeing things and whatever else. I mean, they had model solar systems, they had all kinds of other neat things if you go, and just the people you'd meet. I mean, everyone's really interesting, but of course, I've probably talked to maybe, I don't know, 20 or 30 people. You can't talk to everybody in 3 days, and that would always be great. So I met all kinds of great people, and we're going to do some future shows on that too, and some people.
Yeah.
So anyone who that goes there, I mean, they have a telescope making competition where you can learn neat things about telescopes, even if you don't want to make one yourself. So there's just so much to learn in those 3 days. So everyone
Yeah.
should go at some point.
And you can see a lot of really
Yeah,
nicely done creative telescopes that
yeah,
people have made.
yeah,
That was very cool. The bowling ball bearing telescope, really, that
yeah,
was very cool. Although he didn't make it for
yeah.
that,
Well, the
that,
3D
yeah.
printed one was really neat.
Mm-hmm.
She wrote
Mm-hmm.
all the programs, and she can convert. That was a 10-inch Dob, but she can convert it to any size telescope you want to make.
It
Yeah.
was very cool. Awesome. Well, thank you for the call to action, Bernie. And
Yes.
yeah, we'll be at Stars Over Katahdin
Yep.
pending good weather as well. So, and then you've got the Starfield Starfest
Yeah, at our
in.
own observatory that we built
Mhm.
in yeah 2000, so 22 years ago, and that's September 23rd and 24th.
Awesome.
So everyone's invited to those too.
Great. And then yeah, check out go meet Bernie
Mhm.
at Casco or Sanford. What are the addresses for those viewing events?
Well, Point Sebago campground in Sebago Lake, and a
Mhm.
little campground called Hotopia in Sanford off of Sand Pond Road.
Perfect.
Yeah.
Great. Well, there you go. You
Hmm.
got your events for the next month.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, you've been listening to Scientifically Speaking here on WMPG with myself and Bernie. Stay tuned for something for the weekend with Anella. And from your favorite nerds, don't forget to look up at the stars above. You never know what you might be missing.